Good evening, everyone. It excites me to see so many great people in one Zoom call. We're in Zoom calls all the time, but usually it's only a little bit of great people, not a lot of great people. Um, Thank you all very much for coming this evening. We're just going to jump right into it and just stick around for the end for questions. And thank you. Ah, thank you, Tim. Good evening, residents of Borellis and friends. I'm Michael Wicklaw, artist and local business owner. If you're not familiar with what I do, I'm Metal the Brand, a lifestyle apparel business that was started in 2012. I got my start vending at the downtown growers market and the rail yards market, which I've continued to be a regular season vendor for the past 7 years. In 2018, I opened my brick and mortar retail location, Metal the Store, in the historic Elvado Motel. In spite of COVID and the regular problems faced by local business, my success continues with the support of my beloved community.
And I'm Tim Puter, Albuquerque resident of 3 years, and my background is in event production and supporting artists across all mediums. From street art to audiobooks, live music and arts festivals to dream vacations, I've spent more than a decade in support of bringing creative ideas into reality around the world.
For those who don't know, our team submitted a proposal for the city of Albuquerque's open call of interest on 3 buildings on the north part of the rail yards property. The proposal is to activate one building as an immersive art installation distillery tasting room. The building is the Pattern House, a 2,800 square foot building between the firehouse and the current main entrance into the parking lot. It was built in 1920. This building held the patterns and molds to produce parts used on trains. Prior to the rise of diesel engines, steam locomotives were commonplace. These incredible machines were each individually different, incorporating parts fabricated on the spot to continue operation. The Pattern House served as a library for some parts that were standardized and others that just worked. The interior of the cement poured structure is beautiful with 16-foot ceilings and 6 load-bearing columns. Currently, the building has a single cosmetic wall creating a quarter-sized room on the south side, which we plan to remove upon renovation. The building is not registered as a historical structure, which allows for modification. These modifications will need approval by the State Historic Preservation Office and align with the Borellis Community Vision Statement. The concept of the Spirit Station centers around the spirit of Albuquerque, the name given to the steam engine that is actually buried beneath the corner of the machine shop. Our lore states that during the recent rail yards rehabilitation, the train was dug up and stored in the Pattern House on site. The construction crews began to notice the structure filling with incredible things that mirrored their dreams, and from there, the story of the train began to unfold. The spirit of Albuquerque arrived in the rail yards for repairs sometime in the early 20th century. While unique in detail and design, not much attention was given to it as it sat for repairs. Upon closer examination by yard workers, it presented itself as a train like no other. It appeared as though it had been built across many eras. Ornate etching, unfamiliar lettering, organic shapes, and functional design all converge into its singular, ineffable form. And yet the most mysterious quality of the spirit of Albuquerque was the feeling of its presence, a relief similar to meeting eyes with a loved one or making acquaintance with a stranger who already feels like a friend. It is planned to use real rail yard workers, incorporating their history with fantasy of the narrative. As we dig deeper, we learn that the spirit is powered by the heart of innovation, a pulsating artifact of form and power. The core understanding is its power comes from the love, joy, and dignity that surrounds it. As the steam engines began to decline and diesel engines came into use, the spirit could no longer stay in the yards in fear it would become scrap and spare parts. The caretakers buried it in hopes that it would one day be discovered and share its magic with the community again. Now that it has been uncovered, the heart beats once more. The Spirit Station is telling the community's story throughout time. Most will ask where it came from, what it's seen, and where it can take us, but these questions are not important. It's where we can take it together. In addition to incorporating yard workers and the history of the rail industry, we will use known artifacts and imagery to ensure that the history of the rail yards is not erased. Mr. Accident, the rail yard safety stencil, the shop windows, the iconic steam whistle will all be represented within the space and on the grounds around the Pattern House. While we have created most of the concept as stipulated by our obligation to the city, we want to invite the community in to develop other parts of the installation. There will be platforms for expression dedicated to a variety of artists. Projection and digital artists, lighting designers, musicians, theatrical performance will have opportunities for expression. We welcome all community involvement, whether you are a writer, painter, puzzle maker, fabricator, or just feel inspired to contribute to the idea. Some areas will have a theme to develop on, others will be open to artistic proposals. Chosen creative contributions will be fairly compensated for their work, and we hope that the project lives on through years of development and change as the Spirit Station grows and connects to the creativity of all involved. Our first priority for both artistic proposals, collaboration, and employment will be towards the local Borellis and surrounding community members. We want to remain true to the community of innovation that the rail yards fostered and the diverse group it employed. Down the road, but not at the rail yards, we plan to use our fabrication space for training of new and interested creatives, and as a maker space for contributing artists to work on their own ideas. On site, there will be a gift shop that showcases local and contributing artists' merchandise and apparel. We will be partnering with Valerie Martinez and Artful Life to curate the main pattern house wall facing the Borellis community, as well as with Still Spirits on the bar car, a watering hole and snack venue that continues the theme of the train housed inside. We will be welcoming local food vendors and trucks to partner with us on a regularly scheduled basis. The rest of the outdoor area will be home to a variety of sculptures and installations that continue with the themes inside. With the completion of the promenade between the flue and tank shops, there's an opportunity for event use. The most likely cooperative opportunities we foresee are with the Rail Yards Market, Art Walk, and the Wheels Museum. Other interested parties we'd like to work with are the Fractal Foundation of New Mexico, the Albuquerque Retro Gaming Community, and we're open to other new ideas from unnamed community partners. The project team understands that events bring elements of activity that may not be well received by residents. These event proposals would be made public and open to comment and criticism. Ongoing community guidance is of top priority. We plan to implement a 7-chair advisory board. The board will be selected through an application process with the goal to create a diverse group with different backgrounds. The advice of this group will help in the direction of the activation and the community arts component. Our first advisor, Dr. Manuel Montoya of the UNM Anderson School of Management, has been an incredible resource in creating an inclusive diversity plan, connecting us to community voices and resources. We've also brought on Borellis resident Raul Garza for marketing and community outreach, and we'll be working with some fantastic local artists, including Helen Atkins and Will Goys. You may remember Will Goys from the Downtown Growers Market with his spider gnomes, but he is a carpenter, a ceramicist, does beautiful tile work. And Helen Atkins is a fine art powerhouse doing a bunch of public artworks, a huge figure at the Harwood, and you can see her fine art paintings as well as sculpture. We will be working with Casey War as our construction manager and fabricator. You may recognize his geometric sculptures that are in the front of a lot of houses in the Albuquerque area. And you'd be very surprised. Some of his client-based work is subtle, but it's classy, like these pieces from Hotel Chaco. And we'll be working with Joel Davis, who is a sculptor, builder, ceramicist, tile gentleman. He used to be a part of the Odd City Art Collective, and his fine art is this beautiful wooden sculpture that's flowy and organic. This first community presentation is to inform and solicit a diverse artistic team interested in telling this story with us. We have added a set of forms to our website for anyone who would like to become more involved after hearing our presentation. One each for interested artists, investors, and potential advisory board members. Please be patient with our responses. We will be reaching out to each group at the appropriate times as things progress. We are still very early in the proposal development with the city and don't expect to have a lease until June of this year, which is when the real work would begin. And, you know, in conclusion, the Spirit Station is a living place. It's a breathing space. It's a reflection of the spirit and the will of the people who attend it. Sight, sound, imagination, emotion, time, and space all coalesce here and are manifested into artful reality as a living visage of this place and its people. It is a sculpture, but it is also a chisel. It is part community effort, part preservation of history, and entirely the outcome of reverent ambition in the pursuit of dreams. And now we would like to turn it over to Dr. Manuel Montoya, who will speak on Enchantment Economy, magic as the value proposition, and creating an artistic platform for our community to be seen on the world stage.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Tim. And thanks everybody for taking time out of your evening, especially on a cold evening, to join this conversation. I want to acknowledge the students that I have in my international strategy class that took extra time to join this presentation, and also to my colleague and now former student, but now my colleague Claire Stasiewicz, and my colleague Dr. Ted Hohola for being on the call as well. I know they've been very integral in sharing a lot of ideas. If I missed anybody else, I deeply apologize, but I can't see all the names on the screen. But I want to introduce one of the reasons that I was brought onto this project to be an advisor, and one of the things that I found very exciting about it was, first of all, the energy that Tim and Michael were bringing authentically to this question of magic and fantasy, and how they were really genuinely interested in making this an inclusive economic development agenda. It's I spent the majority of my career both as a humanities scholar, but as somebody who teaches in a management business school. And sometimes those things don't always work together, but I've actually, in recent work and in my recent observations of how the world, particularly the world creative economy, has been moving around, there are two conversations that have started to converge in a pretty meaningful way. And I think that that is largely something that explains the success of other art immersive projects that have been going on both here in New Mexico and throughout the world. And I wanted to take a moment to just drop a couple of thoughts into this conversation as I share with you how I am advising the Spirit Spatium project and working with others to try to think about the potential of this kind of project and why and how it can be truly inclusive. So I begin thinking about this sort of thing first by thinking about the word diversity. It's a word we use all the time. It sometimes gets used so much that it becomes a version of a cliche. Can anybody tell me, even on the chat, or I don't know if you guys can unmute, but even rhetorically, where the word cliche comes from? Claire can answer. The word cliche is actually it's actually a French word that comes from the invention of the printing press, and it was actually a word that was used to kind of describe the sound of the printing press as it came down and printed something over and over and over again. Cliche, 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 cliche. And I always, when I think about the word diversity and how important it is, not just generally speaking, but just to the way that we're living in this very complex world, I wanted to stop using the word as a cliche and just kind of think about what it means. Part of its meaning comes from the word verse, an Old English word for turn. And you see the word verse in a lot of different words. It comes in the word reverse, in other words, to turn something in another direction. A conversation, which sometimes can be unidirectional in most cases, but should be something that goes back and forth. An anniversary, an important word that kind of moves itself over and over again in our rituals and our practices. You can go back to the previous slide, Tim. Yeah, thank you, thank you. But also, it also means universe and multiverse. I'm a huge fan of comic books and of cartoons and all sorts of other things that have some sort of magic element in them. And I've often wondered, especially with the kind of rise of comic book movies that have become so popular, how it is that this question of a universe turns into a multiverse. And for me, all of those words combine into the word diverse, that inside of diverse, there is two verses. There is at least two verses that are twofold and they're contradictory inside of each other. Diversity is not easy. And I've been thinking a lot about that these past few days. And it's not lost on me that during COVID, I think a lot of people have been suffering greatly in the sense that we're not able to interact with each other. But we've also experienced some pretty painful things in the world, in our national forum and our national discourse. Also here at the state level, there's discussions about monuments, about political ideologies that are segregated from each other. And there are conversations that are turning again, both as anniversaries, as reversals, as conversations about who we are and how we represent ourselves in the world. And for me, the word diversity then becomes a problem of how we contain many realities in one. I teach in a business school, and sometimes I'm told that we're supposed to give quote unquote real world experience, to which I often have to sit and think, which reality? Is it the one where you're living your day uh, without food security? Is it the kind where you may actually be living in a pretty secure lifestyle, but are suffering from depression? All of those are very different realities. And I've actually found that magic and fantasy have become the storytelling modes of diversity. One of the reasons I love magic realism, which is a literary mode wherein magic is taken for granted inside of a story that you're telling, is because it is actually a grand metaphor. It's a way of connecting disparate realities. And that's not just some sort of cliche. That's actually something that happens in the world when many painful realities aren't able to speak to each other, or when people aren't able to appear meaningfully in society. And so when I think about the value of showing something that's magic, I found in Spirit Station and the people who have been developing it, this that it's actually defying the cliche of what magic can actually do. And so, Tim, if you can go to the next slide. Um, I've been thinking about examples of how magic has actually gone out in the world and how we actually have turned it into a market activity. Some good examples for me are Sesame Street, where you actually have these magical characters inside of a long tradition of using those to explain or describe social issues, homelessness in Oscar the Grouch, and recently the character Abby represents HIV, impulse control related issues like the Cookie Monster. I grew up loving shows like the Transformers, where climate change was at the forefront of those questions of energy usage and the power dynamics of who benefits from energy usage. And I'm also a big fan of the Miyazaki films and the Japanese tradition of using anime to talk about distinct social issues. Um, if anybody ever asked where Hello Kitty came from, Hello Kitty is the #4 in the World Branding Index. It's considered the #4 most recognizable brand on planet Earth. And it actually follows right behind McDonald's, Christianity, and Islam. And if you think about all of those different ways of expressing ourselves, very, very different universes altogether. I'm called to remember that Hello Kitty actually was designed initially as a way of paying tribute to a field of cats north of Nagasaki that were flash heated during the bombing of Nagasaki. And these cats, it was a cat shelter that were burnt. It was very much like Pompeii, this very painful image of these pets that were flash heated and burned. And it was in the national consciousness in Japan, a very painful object and a painful memory. And Hello Kitty was intended to render cute a very painful object and a very painful part of our history. And that magical element and that fantastic element has been used actually to deal with trauma and with all of these other issues that were going on historically at the time. I find that really important to talk about because even though we see Hello Kitty now as a very it's cliched version, a brand that gets purchased and maybe is something that is something maybe overexposed. Its origins were actually coming from a very sincere place of doing the work of trying to deal with disparate realities in conjunction with each other. I think that that's what magic is for. And one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is why magic is in such high demand as an element inside of the products that we purchase and inside of the media that we consume. And I have to believe that part of it is because of some of the divergent realities that we're experiencing out in the world. Tim, if I can get the next slide here. One of the things as I'm thinking about is Spirit Station is an opportunity to use good magic realism to develop a good multiverse. And that comes from a bunch of philosophical concepts. I'm not going to dwell on those too much right now, but they come from inspirations of thinking about things as not necessarily linear. There are traditions in New Mexico that I really do think have a value and are grounded in this question of enchantment. And I think that the word land of enchantment is actually used and maybe overused as a cliche sometimes. But I think we're at a point, I think right now, of inflection in our common history and where we're going in New Mexico, where we can reuse that word and we can actually reinvest some real significant value inside of it. I think that we're talking a lot about diversity these days in institutions and organizations. But in a lot of ways, we haven't yet connected that to economic development models that contain this kind of magical or fantastic element. And that's why I think that diversity isn't just a binary, but it's a container of all the contradictions that exist inside New Mexico. I've often made the argument that New Mexico is not the 50th state, but it's the first emerging economy. We're disconnected from a lot of the relational agendas of what the United States has done. And I think sometimes we often get ranked low because the work of diversity is invisible labor that doesn't get accounted for. And I think if we just take some of those concepts and do something with them inside of our economic development agendas and within the community partners and artists and people that are trying to do work and trying to look at the world, observe it, and represent it in a meaningful way, I think that there's an opportunity here for us to connect to the global marketplace in a pretty powerful way. Tim, if I could have the next slide. So what I'm actually proposing is that we're using some of the tensions that we have here in Albuquerque, even at the rail yards throughout the state, that we use them as ways of thinking about the complexity of the communities we belong to, and really take seriously this invitation to participate in projects like Spirit Station as a vessel for creating new economic development opportunities. I think it would be very easy for Spirit Station to become a project that at surface is just kind of like a cute cat like Hello Kitty. We'd only see it kind of as a cute, quaint type of thing that we visit every once in a while and then we leave it alone. But I do think that there's actually a lot of potential in what a spirit train, a phantom train, whatever you want to call it, can actually contain. And I think that there's a lot of breadth for it to be a constantly evolving concept that can actually invite all the other forms of economic development productivity inside of it. Tim. So in New Mexico, we have a lot of these stories, right? And again, I'm not going to dwell on them too much. They're actually things that I ask myself all the time. One of the big ones I like to ask is why is it that in recent memory, Thor in the Marvel universe gets to leave his hammer in Socorro? Why is it that we still have all these celestial points of origin, from Spaceport all the way to Chaco Canyon to the Roswell aliens to all of these other characters wherein, the devil comes to town or La Llorona will take you? What are those stories actually meaning? And I think we have a lot of scholars and a lot of people who've been thinking about some of those traditions, both in a social context, but also in an artistic context, that I think are doing some really interesting things. And I think that Spirit Station is one of the ways in which we can kind of invest into as a vessel for maybe even containing some of these artistic questions and what kind of work they're doing. In order to do that, though, I think we need to figure out a way to actually show that there's a conversation and even collectively a market associated with that in a way that we haven't thought about the word market before. Tim? So when I think about trains and I think about recent markets that have developed a desire to think about trains, even all the way from John Henry and kind of the idea of John Henry becoming kind of this iconic American folk hero, in a very complex way, thinking about how his representation of labor and the exploitation of his labor was actually part of the development of this larger legend around human labor and the value of human labor in the American South. I'm also inspired by other types of trains that have been around even within the past decade. And one of my favorite is Snowpiercer. For those of you that have never seen that show, it's actually about a train that is in perpetual motion in a post-apocalyptic world. And it deals with issues of climate change, of sustainability, and also deals with the politics of like the end of the world. Who are we when the world is ending? And I think if we don't limit ourselves to thinking about what a train represents for us in Albuquerque, given its rich history in developing the identity of Albuquerque as it became a really kind of the commercial center of Albuquerque, and still has been, I think that there's a lot of modalities that we can use to rethink and invite artistic and other types of contributions. Tim? So I've often thought that magic and fantasy has, one of the things that's interesting about it, I realize that this slide has just way too much language, but really the point that I wanted to say in this particular slide is that magic has a way of avoiding cultural appropriation. There's a way in which when we evoke these kinds of histories and we evoke messages and icons and symbols and objects, we often ask, where is this coming from and who's benefiting? And I think that's a very serious conversation that we all need to constantly have. But one of the ways that magic allows us to actually participate is it allows us to recreate a world or an environment wherein we can talk about and relate to these objects in new and interesting ways. I've often thought that this is actually one of the things that's at the heart of major social movements and human rights movements about the world that I really admire. The one that I think about most often is in Seoul, Korea, which is around the memorials to comfort women. And the initial idea was to put a hallway in the Seoul airport of comfort women that would sit and look at you as you walked down the hallways and entered the Seoul airport. And really, the Japanese government was really integral in saying we're not going to visit that airport if that's going to happen. Very divergent positions on a very, very complicated history during World War II and the Korean War. And in the end, they decided to use magical butterflies to represent this problem and the exploitation of these women who suffered greatly. This actually comes from the narrative of some of these comfort women. And in a way, it was a way of both acknowledging and celebrating while also inviting people to participate and learn more about the historical trauma of the exploitation of women in Korea, particularly during the Korean War. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to remember, because sometimes we are the heroes of our own stories, and every single one of us could be the hero of our own story and central to those hero narratives. So then how are we going to be able to share or contribute a verse when we're all competing to be heroes of a story? And in a way, magic dissolves some of that, or at least allows us to perform part of that as being part of a mosaic, rather than thinking of ourselves as central to any one narrative. I like this idea of decentralizing some of the potentials of where an economic development agenda can go. And that's why I always say this is actually one of the ways in which we can address problems and represent and celebrate responses to problems, rather than saying that we are representing a problem or representing people or communities. Tim. So I make the argument in my classes that the multiverse is the first and principal market in the world economy. What I mean by that is that you wouldn't have the United Nations without H.G. Wells. You wouldn't have had, in fact, in the creation of the United Nations Charter and the creation of the Bretton Woods Conference, both of those invitations used science fiction novels to explain the need for the creation of these international organizations, one of which was The Day the Earth Stood Still. You would never have had the poor laws in England change, which were exploiting children and child labor exploitation, if you didn't have the work of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, or if you didn't have Alice in Wonderland, or if you didn't have any of the Penny Dreadful stories that were disseminating throughout that period. This was a way for people to connect in a meaningful way and give voice to people who didn't necessarily have a vehicle for that. And I would make the argument that throughout the world, if you look, whether it be in Kashmir, South America, South Central Africa, Central Europe during the Holocaust, it doesn't matter. In any of those cases, you'll find a magic realist story that was a grand metaphor to try to explain the difficulty of a changing world. Alice in Wonderland is one of my favorite globalization stories, because Alice is never the right size, nor are we. And I think part of what has limited the way that New Mexico works as a global market is that we've never celebrated and owned as a market-driven agenda that we are never the right size, and that's just okay. That's fine. And in fact, it's our primary strength. And I think if we get into the business of providing and connecting to those grand metaphors, I think there's a lot of commerce and business to be done. And it can be done in an authentic way that doesn't compromise or exploit the people and the narratives that are telling that story in a meaningful way. Tim? So just as a thought exercise, I would ask you guys to think about some of the realities that we live in here in New Mexico or that you have experienced in your life. And then think about the Spirit Station concept that was presented by Michael just a few minutes ago. And this is where the second line of conversation is interjecting from the one of magic as diversity. And that is this question of value chain equity. So as a management professor, that's a word that's starting to get used quite more often every single day. 10 years ago, value chain equity was discussed more around concepts such as blood diamonds. So when you purchased a diamond ring at Zales or at Cartier or wherever, the question became who benefited from the major percentage of the production of that object. And 80% of all value for diamond rings, for example, used to be located in Belgium, in Antwerp, or in parts of Northern Europe. And if you were cutting diamonds at great risk to your life, if you were mining diamonds in Sierra Leone, you were only actually getting maybe 3% of the value chain of a particular product. Value chain equity is about making sure that everybody who's participating in doing the work and the labor of producing something beautiful in the world, whatever it is, actually does get some sort of equity. And so one of the jobs that we're trying to do here is to create with and for Spirit Station is a value chain equity model that says if artists are interested, how do then we not only create an opportunity for some sort of work and labor that gets valued and paid for, but also how do we create some sort of openness to the market to develop connectivity that then actually allows everybody to prosper in more equitable ways. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but it actually, once you start using those models, it actually changes your configuration of how you develop profit margins and how you think about revenue streams and all these other things that are important to any business. So what we're going to do, and Michael and Tim are going to post this on various media outlets, we're going to be posting a couple of community worksheets wherein you can actually talk about some of the work you do, and it will encourage you to ask questions about how that work is valued and how you might reframe how you value that work in relation to the Spirit Station concept. One of those that gets used in the School of Management is called the RIO analysis, which is a very basic thing of saying, I have this thing that's valuable. Is it rare? Is it inimitable? And do I have the organizational capacity to do something with it? And if not, how can I do something in collaboration with others and other ways of working through a value proposition? Anyway, that's all to say that this exercise is going to be something that's interactive in the community. And Tim, yeah, you can do the next slide. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to get at is creating a community vocabulary around this question of value chain equity. Because if this is a magical immersive art experience, how do we use that magic to do some really interesting things? Right now, we're on the cusp of developing and probably asking ourselves, who are we going to be for the next 40, 50 years as a state? And, you know, in the legislature right now, people are having these discussions about reliance on fossil fuels and maybe trying to invest more in broadband for all. 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to visit the nation of Estonia. And in Estonia, broadband is not a thing you pay for, but broadband is legally a human right. And it is developed as a human right. And it's actually part of that was a larger grand plan to think about how value chain equity can be developed for companies and creative workers. And so there's a lot of moving parts in this. I didn't think I was going to get all that out there in a short presentation to you all, but I just wanted to drop some of those seeds and those pieces of vocabulary to show that they are converging. And the last thing I'm going to say is the majority of the world's growth, and I'm not talking about like population growth, but I'm talking about creative growth and commercial growth, is not happening at the top anymore. It's not happening in Western Europe, and it's not happening in the United States, and China's peaking off as well. It's actually happening in places where global income, if you used US dollars, is less than 2,000 US adjusted dollars and somewhere near 20,000 US adjusted dollars, somewhere in that range. That's 4.5 billion of the world's population. And it's that population that if New Mexico connected to, and we actually had opportunities to connect to with things like Spirit Station, which don't necessarily have to just be you go in and have a drink and you visit, there's all sorts of opportunities for artists to actually use this as a foundation for entering those marketplaces. It is actually quite literally a very powerful train that can be used as a vehicle for entering new marketplaces. So I just wanted to drop those seeds. These are conversations that are going to continue moving forward. And I welcome any questions that you guys have right now. I'm very excited about the potential of what this can be, because I do think that if it's done with the intent and authenticity that I believe it's being done, I think it's going to be a massively successful thing.
Thank you, Manuel. Awesome presentation. And now we're opening it up to questions. You can type them in the chat and we will either, I think we're just going to answer them as they pop up. Okay, question. Technology as magic. Is there room for mobile engagement, not acting as an art installation, to expand the station's multiverse to the web? Spirit camera mobile app for visitors to cross-post on social media. So this is a really great question. So we've been sitting and just theory crafting, what is the visitor experience in a physical form? In most museums, you have an audio guided tour, or one of those annoying little Walkmans that you type in like a little code and it tells you where you're at. So we're going to have QR codes on everything that relate to the artwork itself, its historical significance, and the artist itself. And then you can be linked to merchandise, work, how to get a hold of this artist, how to see them. But as media for the narrative, we're seeing that a part of our teaser is going to be, a publication of sorts, a comic book. There's going to be quite a bit of that, a lot of interaction and a lot of different ways that this story kind of exists and gets out there, and in a variety of languages. And if there's a part of that I didn't necessarily answer, you could type that in too. Dr. Montoya, so is your basic argument that magic and fantasy is a critical tool for societies to understand themselves and their own problems, and that the idea of the Spirit Station would be to essentially host the multiverse where those issues are sorted out?
That was beautifully put, Peter. Maybe I just say yes, but yes, and it is a way for that to actually deal with change, evolving and changing histories and the way that we're narrating those things. It doesn't necessarily have to be the nexus of all of those things, but it actually can be a node, a very vibrant node where those discussions can be located. Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Montoya, let me add to that, and maybe Michael, you can collaborate on this as well. Also, there's something to the idea that we're holding space for things that happen organically around these conversations. So think of that as a benefit of this also.
Awesome. And if people don't know, that's Raul Garza. He's a Borellis community member, and he's a marketing professional at TKO Advertising. He's a part of our team, both community outreach and to help with marketing and messaging. Moving on to the next question. We've been offered one of the buildings by the city, still being defined. So that in particular, we put in an RFEI, an expression of interest. So it's like the lowest possible level of, hey, does anyone have an idea what we can do with this? And for the pattern house. And we would like to add a few other structures to help us, like a welcoming area and gift shop. And then the bar car itself is like 750 square feet. And the exterior would look like a train car, but it could be, we're going to make it that, but it's just to make it, it's to put in the infrastructure so there can be a beverage element there, a bar, and do it weirdly, but they could be kind of looking like anything. And then we want to put 1,000 square foot metal structure on the north side of the pattern house. But again, we don't know exactly what we're getting. We've put in our amended questions, we put in an amount of space that we would like to grow into, because we found out that we wouldn't be able to expand sort of more toward the firehouse in that open area there, because there's going to be a roundabout put in there with development, and then the way into the rail yards is actually right there. And any more questions? Let's see. For the more visual text-based learners, is there a written summary or maybe links to something Dr. Montoya has written along the same lines? I am into the power of magic idea, but it was hard to process on Zoom.
Okay, so Aaron, this is my own self pitch, but yes, I have been working on an article called Enchantment Economy in New Mexico and the Global Economy for a long time. And one of the hard things is I want to get it right. But I guarantee you, like if you sign up for the list and collaborate with this and you're just kind of in the know, I'm going to make sure to publish that publicly and share that with all of you. So yes, that's coming soon.
And how would, well, hold on, here we go. Come in, back up. How would this be practically different from the art presentation style of Meow Wolf or an exhibit at the Albuquerque Museum? Or is this still being worked out? So again, yeah, it's still being worked out. You saw a few bits of illustrated renderings of some concept ideas of the larger artifacts as vessel for others to come in and give creative contribution or activate certain areas. And like we said in our presentation, some areas and artifacts will be kind of specific that people can grow on their own, or we kind of give an idea of an area and then they can kind of go from there. Different than Meow Wolf. So this is a historically driven narrative to, make legends of the notable men and women who have worked there. And the industry itself, it activated a city. I mean, there wasn't much going on in Albuquerque, and it was mostly agricultural. And this gave dignity to families. It gave a generation of families so much love and joy that it bleeds into the community. If you, as some people I've met with and have talked to over the course of this project, who I have not met before, who are notable figures in the Brelis community, I am just the amount of love that just bleeds from them from their childhood, from what the great times their parents showed them, because they were able to have a dignified living and live well. How's it different than an Albuquerque museum? So it blends fantasy with history. It's a lot different. Immersive art installation is not new. We know that Meow Wolf is the Kleenex brand of it. Like when we refer to it, we always refer to that because it's such a success story. I mean, if you've seen the behind the scenes of the documentary, it's super inspiring. I mean, going from having an art house with a bunch of people and going into a 33,000 square foot and all the trials and tribulations that lead up to there and the personal journeys, that's inspiring. We're hoping that it's not as dramatic, but just as fun. Okay, latecomer here.
If I may add to that one as well.
You may.
Part of what makes immersive art experiences important is the word craft. And I'm reminded by my colleague Claire that the word craft is not just about the end product, it's about the process. And as you collaborate with people, there are value propositions that sometimes get left on the table and get left unattended to. If you're actually going to have an inclusive process, it's that process and that collaboration that is the value proposition of the work that you're doing. And if you figure out how to leverage that, which there are ways to do that, then it's not it doesn't then become kind of the surface level kind of Disneyland kind of version of the kind of art experience you're looking at. So I do think that over time, part of the challenge is to make sure that we're sticking to the ethic of the collaborative process and making sure that there is craft and there is leveraging of those interactions in that process. I think that is what makes it distinct.
Question for the group. Hold on, gotta get back up. How does another immersive art experience in New Mexico diversify our economy? How is this different from Meow Wolf? And how can you guarantee continued momentum for this project after the hype is over and in the age of coronavirus related and unrelated? Will Spirit Station connect with these global economies you discussed? How do you all envision the incubation component you mentioned? And Manuel, I'll let you go and then I'll fill in gaps and I think you explained most of it a moment ago.
Let me put it another way in terms of a series of events that are happening in the world economy. 3 weeks ago, the Chilean and Peruvian government, and also the Brazilian, Ecuadorian, and Argentinian government each decided to create their own digital portals for commercial enterprise. And they're going to use blockchain technology and artificial intelligence to develop basically Seattle right now, San Diego, those are ports of entry for the United States for goods and services. What we're seeing now we're on the frontier of that is creating digital ports of entry. There is now kind of a desire now for for how that productivity that we learned all at the stay-at-home era of coronavirus, how that all connects to things. So this isn't, you know, the potential is not just in the immersive art experience. It is actually in how it creates a port of entry for other people and other related industry that's happening within the state. And I think if we keep that in mind, there is actually, and I'm going to say this right now, within the next 15 years, for those of you that are acquainted with what the Bretton Woods Conference was, which was the system that created the World Bank, the IMF, and all these other things, I really do think that world leaders are trying to move to, and communities are moving towards a digital manifesto, a digital Bretton Woods that is actually going to revolutionize how we do commerce in the world. And that's going to include 3D printing and all sorts of other things that other people are hip to right now. But right now, those possibilities are limitless in terms of how we can connect to them. And if we don't have these conversations and share and collaborate with them, then it's going to be the same old thing of leaving people out. And then all of a sudden we're going to try to catch up and say we're trying to help those people out. So I think that's an important thing just to keep in mind in the front window as we're starting to do this work.
And to touch upon the COVID question, so if in fact this continues, well, we're all hopeful for normal. We're all hopeful for it. It looks like it's coming, and this isn't supposed to open until, I'm not going to say a date, but end of 2022 is looking good. But again, I'm not saying a date, because that always happens. Someone says a date and it's like, oh, you said that on the thing, I heard you and you're an idiot. But that's just how that goes. So time ticket entry and low occupancy. So the time ticket entry would be done through a digital portal, and there would be windows in which people can go in and experience. And like we said earlier, the QR codes allow for a contactless experience if people choose to do that. There are a lot of different organizations, and for example, City Museum in St. Louis, the director of that complex is very transparent about what they do in forms of sanitation and wipe downs. So the industry itself everyone is sharing information of how they're making it work, where their governments are letting them operate. Let's see next. Just like we're having tonight, so important. Yes, it's where our value lies. Spirit Station collaboration. Yeah, no, you're cool. It's cool. Those were all very, very good questions, and we appreciate them very much. You mentioned the incorporation of steam whistle into the exhibit, though I'm not sure if that has the magical realism part of the realism part. It was the real you are talking about, the actual whistle that used to mark the shift changes at the rail yards. And finally, I promise, what's your timeline and when do you hope to open doors? So yes, we do know the times in which they went off, because in the time when society became more industrialized, those companies and those factories would have to go wake up their workers at the certain times. And that was something that indicated to wake up, indicated to get to work. You got to be at work at a certain time, when lunches, so on. So our timeline right now is in June. We should have our business plan has to be finished and turned into the city by the end of next month. And it's looking good. We're honestly ahead of schedule with everything we're doing. In June, we would go through leasing negotiations and sign it in June. And then we would start fabrication immediately and be taking investment opportunity where it presents itself, and giving presentations to anyone who would be interested in investing in our creative economy. And hopefully by the end of 2022, the city wants it kind of sooner, but we kind of, again, with anything like this, you could almost never be done with it. And we want to be satisfied before we say anything. And trust me, there'll be enough time for people to be able to get in, and the community will be of first priority to be able to see and touch it. Okay, let's see. This is for all, but especially for Manuel. Don't forget about the School of Architecture and Planning. I'm glad Ted is part of the conversation. Katya Crawford and myself have been involved with the Rail Yards project. I'm also a part of the BCC group. We have been thinking of possible projects with the firehouse and installation projects. We have some resources in a fabrication lab where craft is part of the school and can produce or fabricate elements for the community projects. By the way, all of our student work was recently published and have that available in digital format.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Francisco. Yes, absolutely. I'm very aware that you guys are actually, I think School of Architecture and Planning is doing some pretty amazing cutting edge stuff. Francisco is doing a lot of that. Tim Castillo, Ted Hohola, those are Katya Crawford. Those are all people, Michael Pride, all of those, all of those people are doing some phenomenal stuff. So yes, absolutely. As you know, this is starting to congeal and coordinate. I think that from the university side, we'll make sure to coordinate. Yeah, thank you for that.
And just to throw this in, we're really excited to be there to further activate the arts. There's just so much possibility and so many different contributing forces that we want to be a part of. We want to be energized. We want to have a reason for people to come out or share in a project. And there are other proposals that, have come to the rail yards that are great ideas that just couldn't get off the ground. And we want to see that. Like, we want to be the gateway into making it something, like, we activate it and people come and want to hang out and experience other things. Quick clarification: the whistle you propose to use is the actual whistle that the rail yards once used, or something else, or was that part of the magical realism? So the actual whistle that marked the times of the day or that marked the workday will be used. I don't know how it's not going to be loud outside. Our whole kind of place is to not to cause the community any stress from noises, but inside we would have it, and there would be a place where you would go do the QR code and it would tell the times in which it happened, and maybe give a quote from someone who remembers, like, what that was like to listen to that every day, and how your day was organized around the whistle. Peter, not the actual steam whistle, unless we can find it. I don't know, but a representative of it. Perfect, thanks. Manuel, can you elaborate on the global port of entry? I am curious as to specific ways you envision Spirit Station connecting to the port of entry. Incubation, I mentioned previously. Also, I am wondering if you all plan to incorporate some part or parts of the Wheels Museum.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, there's lots of ways that you can take this, but basically, what I've been seeing in other examples around the world now is that, global ports of entry, just like you're taking a physical object through Seattle or through San Diego or Miami or whatever, there's a kind of labor that's needed to do that. There's customs checks, there's kind of identifying what's permissible within a given marketplace and what's not, what are some of the logistical challenges of delivering something. So if you're a company here that makes a specific product and you want it to actually be sold, for example, in the German market, these digital ports of entry sort out whether or not, what the actual true cost of sending it, and then actually provides advice on how you actually do that. It's very similar to what happened again in Estonia with Skype, is that basically when the Soviet Union fell, NATO Cybersecurity Command, all of that technology was integral in creating Skype. And every time Skype was used, certain groups of investors that had kind of invested in that technology got money from each and every single iteration of that use. If we had a global port of entry, and there's other related things that we can start integrating into this, but if you're actually using the Spirit Station as the metaphorical and actually as the digital vehicle for that, there is actually a per capita or per unit revenue that gets generated for that. And the more that happens and the more interaction happens, that generates and scales up all of the possibilities of what revenue can be generated, both for the Spirit Station and for the artists and others that are participating in it. So it's actually, if you think about it and then multiply it by 4.5 billion, there you go. And that's basically how a lot of people are thinking about this now, is that the way that we scale up and think about the work that we're doing, we have a lot of work to do to figure out what is ethical, sustainable, but also inclusive of how you take advantage of that new highway that's coming 15, 20 years down the road.
Awesome. And to answer the second part of the question, of course, we're going to do cool stuff with the Wheels Museum, where if we make it in there, we're going to be neighbors. We're going to activate the space together. Who comes and sees me is going to come and see the Wheels Museum. And yeah, we're just excited to be able to get out anything. Liba, if you want to get out those Model Ts and put them out, I want them. I want them in front. I want people to take pictures with them and to be just so stoked to be in the history. Okay, maybe plan on some areas as flex space with portions of the installations changing out periodically. Will it make a new experience with each successive visit? So Valerie Martinez of Artful Life, she will be our community arts component liaison, where there will be 2D and 3D space that will be changing over time. we do want the exhibit to change here and there now and again. And I mean, we're still in the process of trying to figure out what are these areas, are these so it is, so you have artifacts that create a vessel for storytelling, but then within that you have these modules that can be switched out, interacted with. And we're just really excited to see what people come up with. And we're hoping that the longevity of the project has to do with communities celebrating another group of individuals who have contributed their creative talents into redefining the space. Imagine the first time you go and you're like, oh, this is cool. I learned this. I saw this. I came to see my friend's thing. And then you come back a year later and you're like, whoa, it changed. And this is exciting. That's what I'm excited about, because it's only, the whole area is 5,000 square, we're hoping for 5,000 square feet of area to work with, but just doing as much of that as we can with any nook and cranny as we can. That's exciting. How will funds generated through this initiative be allocated after the obvious, keeping the lights on, paying folks a living wage, etc.? Gift shop. Yes, there will be a gift shop. So how will the funds be generated through this initiative? So it's going to be generated through ticket sales.
How will they be allocated after we make money and we are paying the bills?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that's going into our makerspace and our plan to kind of give people these artistic skills to express themselves. And we plan on putting it into arts programs in the community and to the artists that continue to contribute and keep it afloat.
Thanks, Tim. I think that she's looking for clarification on what happens to the profits, basically. Will it be reinvested? Will someone, individual or private group, make money off this? Or do we not know that yet? What happens to the profits?
We're still working through the capex and operating budgets. We're still getting what those numbers are and what it is, but we're going to be transparent about what it is that we're doing and what it is that's happening.
Again, I think that's why it's important to develop a really robust value chain equity model. And so like if you're doing a certain kind of work and it's leading towards market growth and development, there are ways that you can account for that, but it just requires that it's not any one function. So if it's coming through related and supporting industries that manifest from this, there are models that you can create where communities become basically shareholders of some of that work, right? So there's lots of work to be done in that regard, but the point is to actually make sure that you're mindful of that and creating that as you move along and developing a transparent way of sharing that.
Cool. Next question was about connecting with Working Classroom. We have sent an email to them. They're on the list of connecting to individuals and getting information. We also reached out to the 2926 Steam Locomotive. I know that's not the technical group name, but I recently became a member, and we're really excited to see. That's been a 20-year project, and literally last year was supposed to be the first year that it would move under its own power, and then COVID just had to come in and ruin it. But they still got to get the tool car done, I think, so they have time. They can be tricky to nail down. I just heard they didn't have they didn't have a main director, and they're not. I don't know, but we're excited. And is there anything else we can answer for y'all this evening? This is actually I can't believe there's been like 50 people in this room. That's cool.
Thank you all for showing up. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's it, Metal.
I guess that's it. Cool. Now, thank you all so much for coming out and listening to what Tim and I presented and Dr. Manuel Montoya's Enchantment Economy presentation. This is going to be available on YouTube, and please share it with anyone that you'd like to. It'll also be translated into Spanish, so that, for any of the Spanish community that would like to contribute and participate. Cool. Well, yeah, everybody, I guess everybody have it's so awkward to turn this off.
Yeah, please reach out if you've got ideas, if you're interested and you want to join in on it. we're going to continue to have these conversations with the community and try to develop something that gives back to the community while supporting the artists in our community as well. So look forward to hearing from you all.
Bye, everybody.